What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by. Today's project is this well-used Stihl trimmer, and the problem is that it starts and runs, but the trimmer head doesn't spin like it's supposed to. Let's take a good look at it, find out what's wrong with it, and hopefully we can fix it. In this video, we try and repair this trimmer. However, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. Now, this trimmer belongs to a coworker of mine, and they do yard work on the side. It's been a few days since I spoke to them, but they told me that this trimmer is going to be a backup, and they need to make sure it's working like it's supposed to. Well, if it ends up on this channel, it usually means it needs some sort of repair, but this time it's something I haven't had to deal with before, and it'll be very apparent later on when I get to the problem, and I don't even realize it at the time. One of the first things I like to do is look over the equipment and check its overall condition, and well, it's pretty obvious that this thing is used commercially. It's a bit rough everywhere you look, but the cool part is that it's meant to take this type of abuse. That's one of the differences between residential versus commercial grade equipment. The other way you can tell that it's being used commercially is that someone's modified the engine cover to get to the spark arrestor screen just so they can throw it away. That way it won't ever clog up with carbon again. Now I would do this at your own risk because without the screen there's an increased potential for starting a grass fire. The next thing I want to do is start the trimmer and see the problem firsthand. That way I can get an idea what the issue might be. As you just saw, after getting it started and letting it warm up, I squeezed the trigger and the head was spinning, but very slowly. Now the first place I want to start at is at the gearbox, and the reason is it's a lot easier to deal with than the clutch. If I try to turn the trimmer head, it's very difficult, like there's a bearing problem in either the gearbox or the drum for the clutch. Now to make filming a little bit easier, I'm going to remove the gearbox from the shaft. The first thing I want to check is that the grease in the gearbox is still good and not dried up. To do that, just remove the bolt on the side and you should be able to inspect the grease. There seems to be plenty inside the gearbox, so I don't think it's a lack of lubrication. If you see that your grease looks dry, then the bearings might be gone and causing a lot of drag on the engine. Now this one, however, still looks good, so it may not be a bearing issue, but something wrong with the head itself. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to spin the drive shaft and see if there's any drag on it from the clutch drum bearing near the engine. As far as I can tell, it's spinning just fine. I know it's difficult, but I can see the clutch drum through these openings and it's moving just fine. That definitely confirms that the issue isn't related to the upper part of the drive line. For the next part, I'm going to put the gearbox back on the shaft. That way it'll be easier to remove the head. The reason is that I need to lock the drive shaft so I can spin the head off of it. To do that, I'm going to use a drill bit, but you can use an Allen wrench or even a small screwdriver. There should be some sort of markings on your head to tell you which way to spin it when taking it off. Here you can see both the thrust plate and the washer. This is the point I should have realized what the problem was. I've never had to replace a head on a Stihl trimmer before, so I wasn't sure how the plates were supposed to be arranged, but this plate isn't supposed to be in this location. However, I'm still going to show you how this repair eventually played out because it brings up a good point later on. Since I thought the gearbox was bad, I ordered a new aftermarket one to replace the original one, and for only $30, I have to say it looks almost identical to the original one. However, you'll see here in a bit what sometimes happens when you buy an aftermarket part. The first thing I want to do is look at the grease in the gearbox, and even though there's plenty of grease, it appears to have a thicker viscosity than the OEM one. I'm not saying that this is a bad thing. I am pointing out though that it's not the same stuff as the original one. The next thing I'm going to do is remove the nut and the rider plate, and this is when things start to get a little confusing. That's when I noticed that the smaller thrust washer was on the opposite side of the larger thrust plate. I thought this might have been installed wrong from the overseas manufacturer, so I dismissed it. I then put the washer on first, followed by the plate, and then installed the trimmer head just the way the original parts came off. So the first thing I noticed was that the plate was sitting further away from the housing than the original one. I then realized that the trimmer head was also stuck and hard to spin, just like before. I then took it apart to try to figure out what the problem was. Once apart, I then swapped the plate and the washer, installed the head again, hoping that this was actually the right way and that whoever put the original one on had made a simple mistake. So in this configuration, the head does spin, but the thrust plate is loose for some reason. Now this might sound bad, but this could make a lot of noise even over the sound of the engine and may cause some extra issues later down the road. Now I don't know why it's loose, and maybe I'm making this out to be a bigger issue than it really is, but just to be sure, I'm going to replace the newer parts with the older parts and see if it's still loose on the new gearbox. All I know is that the old setup didn't rattle like this, so I'm pretty sure the new one shouldn't either. With the older plate and washer installed on the new gearbox, everything works just like it should and without any rattling. I finally decided to do some research and come to find out the plate does go first, followed by the smaller washer, and finally the head. That means that someone installed it backwards, and that was causing our binding problem. And unfortunately, since I wasn't aware of it, I just put everything back on the way I found it. At least I learned my lesson, so this shouldn't happen again. Now that it's working like it's supposed to, I'm going to install the new gearbox along with the original plate and washer back on the shaft. Then I'm going to try another test start, and hopefully it spins like it's supposed to. So it looks like it's working very well, and now all I have to do is tell my coworker what happened. That's when they told me they were the ones who installed the trimmer head, and they must have swapped the washer on accident. I then told them that means we just replaced an OEM Stihl gearbox for a cheap aftermarket one. I then asked them what they wanted me to do, leave the aftermarket one on or put the higher quality but used one back on. They told me to put the old one back on, which I did, but I did that after filming. So my question is, if this was your trimmer, would you have kept the new gearbox on there, or would you have put the used one back on instead? Personally, I would put the original one back on. The reason is because of the build quality of the original one is far better than a cheap overseas one. I think the phrase, "you get what you pay for," applies here. The price for a new OEM gearbox is $120, while the aftermarket one was only 1/4 of that price. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions, and I hope to see you in the next video.